They say you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but we do it every day. We draw lines based on the clothes people wear, the cars their parents drive, or the neighborhood they come from. This is a story about a boy who was judged by the dirt under his fingernails and the rust on his father's truck. They gave him a name meant to break him, to remind him every day that he was worthless, a piece of human scrap in a world that only values what's new and shiny. But they never bothered to look inside, to see the fire he was hiding, to hear the music that was raging beneath his silence. They never imagined that the boy they called Junk was about to create something more beautiful and powerful than they could ever understand. Get ready, because you're about to witness how the quietest person in the room can make the most deafening noise. The hallways of Northgate High were a river, and Leo had long ago mastered the art of becoming a stone at the bottom, smooth, silent, and hoping the current would simply pass over him. He moved with his shoulders perpetually hunched, a defensive posture that made his already thin frame seem smaller. His worn-out backpack, its fabric faded from years of use, was always slung low over one shoulder, as if ready to be dropped at a moment's notice. His eyes, a deep and thoughtful shade of brown, were almost always fixed on the scuffed gray linoleum floors, charting a familiar course through a sea of brand-name sneakers and confident strides. Northgate was located in the heart of America's Rust Belt, a town of shuttered steel mills and quiet desperation, where the ghost of prosperity haunted every street corner. Here, social status was a currency in short supply, and the hierarchy was brutal. Leo, it had been decided by his peers, was at the very bottom. He was the son of a scrapper, a man who made a hard, honest living combing through the skeletons of abandoned factories and forgotten industrial lots. His father would rise before dawn, his old Ford pickup truck rattling to life, and return after dusk, the truck bed laden with discarded metal, the bones of the town's dead industry. It was grueling work, but it put food on the table. To the students of Northgate, however, whose parents were mostly service workers or unemployed, Leo's family was a source of morbid fascination and cruel amusement. The dirt and grease under his father's nails, they decided, clung to Leo as well. The daily ritual was as predictable as the morning bell. As he navigated the crowded corridor, a voice, sharp and laced with arrogance, would cut through the chatter. "Hey, look! It's Junk Boy!" The voice always belonged to Kyle, the school's star quarterback, a boy whose popularity was built on the same casual cruelty his own father used to run his small construction business. Kyle's friends, a loyal pack of athletic, insecure boys, would echo the name, a chorus of derision that followed Leo like a shadow. Junk Boy. The name stuck, a label of shame slapped on him that defined his entire existence within those gray cinder-block walls. He wasn't Leo anymore. He was the smell of rust and motor oil, the embodiment of the town's decay. He was something to be discarded. He never reacted, never looked up. He had learned early on that silence was his only shield. Any response, whether anger or tears, would only be more ammunition for their amusement. So he absorbed the insults, letting them settle deep inside him, another layer of rust on his soul. The name Junk Boy became Leo's unofficial identity, a heavy, invisible cloak he was forced to wear from the first bell to the last. It dictated where he sat at lunch, always alone in the far corner of the noisy cafeteria, picking at the simple sandwich his mother packed in a brown paper bag. He would watch other tables, filled with laughter and easy camaraderie, and feel a pang of longing so sharp it was like a physical ache. He would eat quickly, his eyes down, trying to make himself as small as possible, as if he could will himself to disappear entirely. The name also dictated his silence in class. He was a smart kid, observant and thoughtful, and he often knew the answers to the teacher's questions. But to raise his hand was to invite attention, and attention always, inevitably, led back to the name. So he stayed quiet, letting others speak, his own thoughts and ideas trapped behind a wall of fear. The bullying soon escalated beyond mere words. It became a series of small, calculated cruelties designed to reinforce his status as an outcast. His backpack would be accidentally kicked down the hall, its contents spilling across the floor for everyone to see. His homework would vanish from his desk, only to reappear later in a trash can, stained with leftover food. Each incident was small enough to be dismissed by the overworked and indifferent teachers as boys being boys. But for Leo, it was a constant, grinding erosion of his spirit. He felt like a ghost, haunting the edges of a world he desperately wanted to be a part of, but that clearly wanted nothing to do with him. His only escape, his only sanctuary, was a dilapidated, corrugated metal shed that stood behind his family's modest house. It was a place filled with the organized chaos of his father's trade. Piles of copper wire sorted by grade, stacks of aluminum siding, and the ever-present sharp scent of his family's livelihood. But in one corner, beneath a dusty, oil-stained tarp, was Leo's treasure, a battered second-hand electric guitar. It was an ugly thing, a no-name brand with a deep scratch across its body and a missing volume knob, a piece of junk someone had thrown out. But to Leo, it was the most beautiful object in the world. Here, in the cold, quiet shed, the weight of the name would finally lift. He would plug the guitar into a tiny, crackling amplifier his dad had salvaged from a dumpster, and he would play. He didn't know chords or scales in any formal sense. He just played what he felt. The anger, the frustration, the deep, aching loneliness, it all poured out through his fingertips, transformed into raw, powerful, and surprisingly intricate melodies. The shed was the only place he wasn't Junk Boy. He was just Leo. And Leo, he was beginning to discover, could make music that screamed. In the sanctuary of the shed, Leo's true self began to emerge. The space was his cocoon, a world away from the harsh judgment of Northgate High. As soon as he got home from school, he would drop his backpack by the door, grab a quick snack, and retreat to his metal fortress. There, surrounded by the discarded remnants of other people's lives, he would create something entirely new. His musical education was a patchwork quilt of scavenged knowledge. He didn't have money for lessons, so he became a digital archaeologist. At the school library, he would use the slow, outdated computers to watch grainy videos of old bluesmen from the Mississippi Delta, his eyes tracing the movements of their gnarled fingers across the fretboard. He studied the raw energy of early punk rockers and the intricate, soulful solos of classic rock guitarists. He absorbed it all, not by memorizing theory, but by feeling the music. He would spend hours in the shed, his fingers growing calloused and strong, trying to replicate the sounds he heard in his head. The guitar, once an unfamiliar object, became an extension of his own body. His music was a language he was inventing as he went along. It was a raw, unfiltered expression of everything he couldn't say out loud. The melodies were often melancholic, weaving through minor keys that mirrored the gray, overcast skies of his town. But beneath the sadness, there was a current of fierce, defiant energy. He would build a riff from a slow, mournful start into a furious, distorted crescendo, the tiny amplifier buzzing with the strain. It was the sound of his own silent scream, a protest against the name, the laughter, and the crushing weight of being invisible. He never sang. His voice was something he had learned to suppress, but the guitar spoke for him, its notes crying out with a clarity and passion he could never muster. At school, however, this hidden world remained a secret. He was still the quiet, withdrawn Junk Boy. One person who noticed his profound isolation was the school's music teacher, Mrs. Anya Sharma. She was a kind, observant woman who had a knack for seeing the potential in students others had written off. She saw the rhythmic way Leo would tap his fingers on his desk, the far-off look in his eyes as if he were listening to a song no one else could hear. She tried to draw him out. "Leo, have you ever thought about joining the school band?" she asked him one day in the hallway. "We could always use another guitar player." Leo froze, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and terror. He mumbled a quick, "No, thanks," and hurried away, leaving Mrs. Sharma looking after him with a puzzled, compassionate expression. The thought of sharing his music, of exposing the only part of himself that felt pure and real, was too terrifying to even consider. His melodies were safe in the silence of the shed. It was on a dreary Monday morning that a spark of possibility pierced through the gray monotony of Northgate High. During the morning announcements, the principal's voice crackled over the ancient intercom system, followed by the overly enthusiastic voice of Mrs. Sharma. "Students, get ready," she chirped. "In 1 month, we will be holding our annual talent show. We want to see everything you've got. Singing, dancing, magic, comedy, you name it. This is your night to shine." Posters appeared in the hallways almost instantly, vibrant splashes of color against the dull, painted cinder blocks. They depicted smiling, generic silhouettes on a stage under a spotlight, with the words, "What's your talent?" printed in bold, cheerful letters. For most students, the announcement was a source of excitement and playful speculation. The school's small but dedicated drama club began planning a skit. A group of cheerleaders started choreographing a dance routine. For Leo, however, the news landed like a small explosion in his chest. A talent show, a stage, a spotlight. It was the physical manifestation of the secret dream he nurtured every night in the cold, dusty shed. It was a terrifying, electrifying thought. The possibility was a fragile flame, and the casual cruelty of his peers was a constant, chilling wind threatening to extinguish it. During lunch, he overheard Kyle and his friends mocking the very idea. A talent show? What a joke, Kyle said, leaning back in his chair with an air of supreme confidence. "What's anyone gonna do? Show us how fast they can assemble a burger at the diner?" His friends laughed. Then one of them turned, a malicious glint in his eye, and pointed directly at Leo, who was sitting alone in his usual corner. "Hey, maybe Junk Boy will sign up. He can show us how to sort trash." The laughter that followed was louder and more brutal than usual. It wasn't just a passing insult. It was a direct mockery of his deepest, most secret hope. Leo felt his face flush with heat. He quickly packed up his uneaten sandwich and fled the cafeteria, the laughter chasing him down the hall. The thought of putting his name on that sign-up sheet now seemed like an act of insanity. It would be like handing his tormentors a formal invitation to humiliate him in front of the entire town. That night, in the shed, he played his guitar with a frantic, desperate energy. The music was a chaotic mix of hope and fear. He closed his eyes and imagined it. Walking onto that stage, the silence of the crowd, the warmth of the spotlight. He imagined the first note, the way the music would fill the auditorium, silencing the whispers and the laughter. He imagined them seeing him, really seeing him, for the first time. But then, the dream would curdle, replaced by the nightmare scenario. The sound of laughter drowning out his music, the jeers from the crowd, the crushing weight of public failure. And it's right here, in this moment of crippling doubt, that so many of us give up. We let the fear of what other people might say or think become the cage that holds our dreams captive. How many times have you let that fear win? If you've ever felt that struggle, and if you're rooting for Leo to find the courage to fight back, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. It's a way of saying that you believe in the power of taking that first terrifying step. Because for Leo, that step was everything. The festival was his one chance to rise above the label they had forced upon him, but the decision to even try was the hardest battle he would ever have to face. The days following the announcement were a silent, internal war for Leo. The sign-up sheet for the talent show was posted on a bulletin board right outside the cafeteria, a location he was forced to pass every single day. It became a symbol of his conflict. Each time he walked by, his heart would hammer against his ribs. He would slow his pace, his eyes darting toward the list of names, a mix of familiar and surprising student performers. He saw dancers, singers, a comedian, even a kid who was planning a martial arts demonstration. There was an empty space near the bottom of the list that seemed to be calling his name, a blank void of possibility. But then he would hear a whisper of his nickname from a passing group, or catch a condescending smirk from one of Kyle's friends, and the fear would rush back in, cold and paralyzing. He would quickly lower his head and hurry away, his courage deserting him. He was trapped in a vicious cycle. In the shed at night, he was a rock star. He would practice for hours, his fingers flying across the fretboard, the music pouring out of him with a confidence he didn't know he possessed. He composed a new piece, a melody that started with a quiet, melancholic riff that slowly built in intensity, layer by layer, until it exploded into a powerful, soaring anthem of defiance. It was his story, told in notes instead of words. It was the best thing he had ever created. But the next day at school, he was just Junk Boy again, and the rock star from the shed felt like a character from a dream. The confidence would evaporate, leaving only the familiar, gnawing anxiety. He felt like two different people, and the one who had to walk the halls of Northgate High was a coward. The deadline to sign up was Friday. On Thursday night, Leo sat in the shed, the empty sign-up form he'd secretly taken from the school, lying on an old oil drum beside him. He stared at it, then at his guitar. He thought of the laughter, he thought of the names, he thought of the constant grinding humiliation. But then, he thought of his father's words. "Don't you ever let their noise silence your music." He remembered the quiet pride in his dad's eyes. He thought about spending the rest of his high school years as a ghost, as a punchline. Was that the life he was going to accept? Was he going to let Kyle and his friends define him forever? A slow, burning anger began to replace the fear. It wasn't just about playing the guitar on a stage anymore. It was about taking a stand. It was about claiming his own name. With a deep, shuddering breath, he picked up a pen. His hand was trembling so violently he could barely form the letters, but he did it. He wrote his name, Leo, in the blank space. The next day, he walked to the bulletin board during the busiest part of the lunch hour. He didn't try to be discreet. He walked right up to the board, ignoring the stares and whispers, and pinned his completed form to the bottom of the list. It was official. There was no turning back. The night of the talent show arrived with a palpable buzz of excitement that felt, to Leo, like a gathering storm. The school auditorium, a place he usually associated with boring assemblies, was transformed. Strings of colorful lights were draped across the stage, and the cavernous room was packed with a boisterous crowd of students, parents, and community members. The air was thick with the smell of popcorn and cheap perfume. Backstage, the atmosphere was a chaotic mix of nervous energy and giddy anticipation. Dancers stretched in corners, a comedian nervously paced back and forth, muttering his jokes, and a singer warmed up her voice with a series of scales. And then there was Leo. He sat on a cold metal folding chair in the darkest corner, his battered guitar case clutched in his lap like a shield. His hands were ice-cold and slick with sweat. Every cheer from the audience felt like a judgment, every burst of laughter a prelude to his own humiliation. He could feel the stares of the other performers. Even here, he was an outsider, the strange, silent boy who had inexplicably signed up. He watched from the wings as the first few acts went on. There was a surprisingly good dance troupe, a cringe-worthy magic act, and a singer who belted out a pop song with more confidence than talent. With each performance, the knot in Leo's stomach tightened. He felt a powerful urge to run, to slip out the back door and disappear into the safety of the night. He could almost hear Kyle's voice in his head, leading a chorus of laughter. Just as he was about to give in to the panic, he felt a gentle hand on his shoulder. It was Mrs. Sharma. She didn't say anything about being brave or wishing him luck. She just looked at him with her kind, steady eyes and said, "Leo, I brought you some water. Just breathe, and remember the music is yours. No one can take that from you." Her simple act of compassion was an anchor in his sea of fear. It was enough. Then he heard it. The host, a cheerful history teacher, announced, "And for our next act, we have something a little different. Please give a warm welcome to Leo." A scattered, polite applause rippled through the auditorium, but it was quickly punctuated by pockets of snickering from the student section. He could hear a distinct voice, probably Kyle's, yell, "Play us the Trash Man Blues, Junk Boy!" The laughter that followed was sharp and cruel. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Leo stepped out from the wings and into the blinding glare of the spotlight. The walk to the lone stool in the center of the stage felt like a mile. Every step was heavy, his legs feeling like lead. He could see the faces in the crowd, a blur of curiosity, pity, and outright mockery. He sat down, his hands trembling as he lifted his worn-out guitar from its case. He avoided looking at anyone, focusing only on plugging the instrument into the amplifier. The silence of the auditorium was deafening, a vast, empty space waiting to be filled with either his triumph or his failure. Leo sat on the stool, the single spotlight isolating him in a pool of white, unforgiving light. He could feel the weight of hundreds of pairs of eyes on him, most of them expecting a disaster. He took one last, shaky breath, remembering his father's words, Mrs. Sharma's kindness, and the silent promise he had made to himself in the shed. Then, he closed his eyes. He shut out the crowd, the whispers, the auditorium. He transported himself back to his sanctuary, to the familiar smell of rust and oil, to the only place he had ever felt truly free. His fingers, now steady, found their place on the fretboard, and he began to play. The first notes that emerged from the amplifier were not loud or aggressive. They were quiet, melancholic, and hauntingly beautiful. It was the opening riff of the song he had composed, the melody that told his story. It was the sound of loneliness, of walking down empty hallways, of eating lunch by himself. The initial whispers in the audience died down, replaced by a confused silence. This wasn't the clumsy, amateurish fumbling they had expected. This was music. As the riff repeated, Leo began to build upon it, his other hand weaving in a delicate, intricate harmony. The music was still sad, but now a new feeling was creeping in, a note of resilience, of a spirit that refused to be completely broken. Then, the song shifted. With a sudden stomp on a distortion pedal he'd salvaged, the quiet melancholy erupted into a wall of powerful, distorted sound. The riff became a driving, angry anthem. It was the sound of every insult, every shove, every piece of his dignity that had been chipped away. His fingers moved across the fretboard with a speed and precision that was breathtaking. He wasn't just playing notes, he was attacking them, pouring years of pent-up frustration and rage into his instrument. The audience was completely captivated, their skepticism melting away into sheer astonishment. Kyle, sitting in the middle of the student section, had a look of stunned disbelief on his face, his mouth slightly agape. Mrs. Sharma stood in the wings, tears welling in her eyes as she witnessed the raw, undeniable talent she had only suspected. The song reached its crescendo, a soaring, majestic solo that was filled not with anger anymore, but with a powerful, triumphant hope. It was the sound of a caged bird finally taking flight, of a voice long silenced, finally screaming its existence to the world. It was beautiful and heartbreaking and glorious all at once. The boy they called Junk Boy was creating something pure and profound from the scraps of his own pain. As the final ringing note of Leo's guitar faded into the vastness of the auditorium, a profound silence descended. It was a silence unlike any he had ever known. It wasn't the silence of mockery or indifference. It was the silence of awe, a collective breath held by hundreds of people who had just witnessed something they couldn't quite process. For a full 3 seconds, the only sound was the faint hum of the amplifier. Leo slowly opened his eyes, his heart pounding, bracing for the laughter he was sure was coming. But it never came. Instead, from the back of the auditorium, a single pair of hands started to clap. It was his father, standing tall, his face beaming with a pride so immense it was visible even from the stage. His mother stood beside him, tears streaming down her face as she clapped with all her might. Then, from the wings, Mrs. Sharma joined in, her applause sharp and enthusiastic. That was all it took. The spell was broken. The single clap became a dozen, then 100, and then the entire auditorium erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was a roar. A thunderous, overwhelming wave of sound that washed over Leo, so powerful it felt like a physical force. People were on their feet, whistling and cheering. The students who had snickered just minutes before were now clapping wildly, their faces a mixture of shock and genuine admiration. They weren't just applauding a good performance. They were acknowledging a profound truth they had just been shown. They had witnessed a boy take years of their cruelty and transform it into something beautiful and powerful. It was an act of alchemy that left them humbled. Leo looked out at the sea of standing, cheering people, and his own tears began to fall. But these were not the silent, shameful tears he shed in the shed. These were tears of release, of victory, of a weight being lifted from his soul that he had carried for as long as he could remember. He saw Kyle in the crowd, no longer smirking, just staring at the stage with a look of utter bewilderment, as if the world had been turned upside down. In that moment, Leo wasn't junk boy. He wasn't the son of a scrapper or the kid with worn-out clothes. He was an artist. He was the boy who had silenced a gymnasium with nothing but a beat-up guitar and the truth of his own heart. The roar of the crowd was more than just approval. It was an apology. It was acceptance. It was the sound of his old name dying and his real one being born. The days following the talent show were like waking up in a different world. The name Junk Boy vanished from the hallways of Northgate High as if it had never existed. It was replaced with, "Hey Leo," or "Awesome job on Friday, man." Students who had once looked right through him now met his eye and offered a nod of respect. The invisible walls that had surrounded him had crumbled. He still sat at the same table in the cafeteria, but he was rarely alone anymore. Other students, mostly quiet, artsy kids who had also felt like outsiders, would drift over, asking him about his music, about the chords he played, about the inspiration for his song. For the first time, he found himself in the middle of a conversation, sharing a part of himself without fear. Kyle and his friends kept their distance. There were no more taunts, no more shoves. There was just a wide, awkward berth, a silent admission of their defeat. One afternoon, Kyle passed him in the hall, and for a split second, their eyes met. Leo saw not hatred, but a flicker of something else, confusion, and maybe even a hint of grudging respect. It was a silent truce. The biggest change, however, came from Mrs. Sharma. She approached him the next day with an offer that made his heart soar. "Leo," she said, "that wasn't just a talent show performance. That was a composition. You have a gift, a real gift. The school has a small recording studio that no one ever uses. I want you to use it, and I'd be honored if you'd consider joining the advanced jazz band. We need a lead guitarist." Leo accepted both offers without hesitation. The shed was no longer his only sanctuary. The music room became his second home. He learned to read music, to understand theory, to play with others. His world expanded with every new chord he learned. He never forgot where he came from. On weekends, he would still help his dad sort through scrap metal, his hands, now calloused from both work and music, equally comfortable gripping a wrench or the neck of his guitar. His father would watch him, a quiet pride in his eyes. "See, son," he said one day, "you didn't run from the noise. You just made your own music louder." And that's the beautiful truth at the heart of this story. We can't always control how the world sees us or the labels they try to put on us. But we can control what we create. We can take the junk, the pain, the rust of our lives, and build something strong, something true, something that is uniquely ours. If Leo's story resonated with you, if it reminded you of the power of your own hidden talents, let us know in the comments what you're passionate about. Share this video with anyone who might need a reminder that their voice matters, and be sure to subscribe for more stories of incredible super song. Because like Leo, we all have a song inside of us. It's just a matter of having the courage to play it.